So today's title is The Infinite Power of Our Light. And there was a new pastor that was visiting homes of some of the people that were in his congregation because he wanted to get to know them. And he came to this one house and the lights were on and he could hear noise inside and he knocked on the door and nobody answered. And so he waited a few minutes and he knocked a little bit louder the second time. And when still there was no response, he took out his business card and he wrote on the back of the business card, Revelations 3:20. And he stuck it in the door. And the next Sunday, after the offering plates were passed around, he found someone had put his note or his little business card back in the offering plate, and they had added a scripture to his scripture, which was Genesis 3:10. Well, he could hardly wait to get back into his office and see, oh my gosh, what is Genesis 3:10? And he grabbed his Bible and he opened it to the verse that was cited. And first he looked at Revelations 3:20, and which states, Behold, I stand at the door and I knock. And then he started to laugh because he was reading in Genesis 3:10, and it said, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid, for I was naked. And and I and I know from Genesis that man and woman were created naked and they knew no shame. And then along comes this nasty old mean serpent that's wound around the tree and convinces first Eve and then Adam that they can eat the forbidden fruit. And then what happens? Their eyes are opened and they realize that they're naked. And then when they heard God coming, Adam and Eve hid because they were ashamed. My guess is that there is not a one of us here today that has not experienced shame in some shape or form. As children, we probably heard from our parents or adults that were working with us, or maybe we heard, just shame on you. That was one of my mother's favorites, shame on you, or shame, shame. And then there was also, you should be ashamed of yourself. I spent my high school years in Portland, Maine. And every year in our English classes, we were required to learn 100 lines of poetry that we had to memorize and then write them out. I still to this day have not decided why they made us do that. And I can still recite pretty much all of Hamlet's soliloquy as well as the witches scene in Macbeth. Now I know that that has just brought me great information through all of the last 60 years. Now, if you're anything like me, though, normally I do not memorize well. That's why I always do my Sunday lessons with notes. And that's why I had such a hard time with foreign languages because they were so difficult for me. But in my sophomore year, I had learned a trick by watching one of my classmates. And that was I could take tiny little pieces of paper and write very, very tiny words of the stanzas and then slip the piece of paper in here because it was hidden, and then just kind of pull my sweater back and look at what was written. Well, Miss Jensen got me. I was so humiliated for cheating, and I felt so ashamed in front of my classmates that it was then that I would decided that I was going to resign from my position as the president of the Greater Portland Christian Youth Council. After all, I didn't deserve that high position because I had set a terrible example for others. Fortunately for me, Miss Jensen talked me out of resigning. She did, however, give me an F on the project or on the assignment, and I still had to memorize the darn poem. What are some of the things that you have been shamed for in your lifetime? Just kind of shout them out so we can all hear them. Even those folks who are on the internet, click it on. What have you been ashamed of or shamed for in the past?
I think there's a lot of stuff about body shame.
Uh-huh. Body shame.
No. Okay, well, drunk, drunk in a public place.
Drunk in a public place. Ooh,
Being too loud.
being too loud.
Yeah, body shame.
Body shame.
Yelling at my kids.
Ah, anybody else want to add one or two?
I was in such a hurry to get my kids to the doctor that I actually accidentally closed the door on the second one as we were going out. And his little baby figure has never been the same.
Okay. Well, I have been reading a book called Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, and she discovered that actually there were 12 categories of shame. And you've mentioned some of them. The very first one is appearance and body image. Another one is money and work, motherhood and fatherhood, what we do in motherhood and fatherhood. We always look back on, and I even have shame for some of the things that I did. Family, parenting, mental and physical health, addiction, sex, aging, religion, surviving trauma, and being stereotyped or labeled. That's a lot of categories for shame to exist in. Shame is a real emotional pain. Just imagine famous people like Monica Lewinsky who had to suffer shame for months on end because she had an affair with the President of the United States. And it stayed on the news constantly. Or how about Lance Armstrong, who was caught using drugs and using blood transfusions to help him win the bicycle races in Europe? He was stripped of all of his medals, and all of his endorsements and everything that he was earning money with went away. Or Emma Stone for being too thin. In her book, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown explains we have all been shamed. We all have good and bad, dark and light inside of us. But if we don't come to terms with our shame or our struggles, we start believing that there's something wrong with us, that we're bad, that we're flawed, or that we're not good enough. Even worse, we start to act on those beliefs. If we want to be fully engaged, to be totally and completely connected, we have to be vulnerable. In order to be vulnerable, we need to develop our resistance to shame. Carl Jung said that shame is a soul-eating emotion. And that is such a visual statement for me. Or John Milton stated that where shame is, there is also fear. Jungians say that shame is the swampland of the soul. When we're in the swampland of shame, we hide from vulnerability. And yet, vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. Vulnerability is the most accurate measure of our courage. Vulnerability is about a willingness to take risks. And when we're in that place of shame, we fear vulnerability, risk taking, and change. After all, we don't want to look stupid. We don't want to look crazy, or worse yet, out of line. I don't know if any of you have seen the advertisement on TV about one of the insurance companies, and they're having this meeting, and one of the boss who's leading the meeting has a mug that has the Georgia dogs on it. And so he congratulates her, and then he starts to go woof, 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 woof. And of course, the meeting just goes downhill from there. And of course, everybody keeps calling him Barkman, Barkman. And so they keep reinforcing the shame that this guy feels. How many of you have created some idea bumping around in your brain? Maybe it's a painting you want to do, or a book that you want to write, or poetry that you want to do, or a class you want to treat. It could be learning a new skill like photography or a language, or even learning to throw a pot, but you've never made the time to let it happen. Is it fear of looking stupid? Or you don't think you're capable of learning something new? Or is it that old thought of I'm not good enough still gnawing away at your brain from something that you learned as a child? That is all about shame. Public speaking used to be the number one fear in America. And why? Because people were fearful of being vulnerable or looking stupid in front of others. And so they would refuse to public speak. If either of those happened, shame and embarrassment would surely show up within the individual. Shame is the gremlin within that says, I am not good enough. Shame is stating that I'm not pretty or handsome enough, or I'm not smart enough, I'm too dumb, I'm not talented enough. Shame is not guilt, because guilt focuses on our behavior. Shame says, I'm bad. Guilt says, I did something bad. Dr. Brown shares that shame has a direct correlation with addiction, depression, violence, aggression, bullying, suicide, and eating disorders. Author Pete Sheehan, who works with large companies like IBM and Apple, stated, the secret killer of innovation is shame. You can't measure it, but it is there. Every time someone holds back on a new idea, fails to give their manager much needed feedback, and is afraid to speak up in front of a client, you can be sure that shame is a part of it. That deep fear we all have of being wrong, of being belittled, or of being less than, is what stops us from taking the very risk required to move companies forward. Shame becomes fear. Fear leads to risk aversion, and risk aversion kills innovation. Shame also prevents connection with others and inner growth. And God only knows we need a lot of connection right now in our world, positive connection. And why are those so extremely important? Our inner growth comes from our willingness to look at ourselves and to reach out to others. It's also about our willingness to initiate our own spiritual growth. I've shared a lot about what shame does to us, but where does it come from exactly? Shame is triggered by 5 major causes. In an article in therapist.com by Susan Radlowski, who is an MSW, she explains 5 areas that we need to examine. Social norms. Communities, families, cultures have norms and expectations regarding gender, race, ability, economic status, and sexuality. We may feel shame if we don't achieve those expectations, even if they're unhealthy for us or impossible to meet. Religion. Faith communities might shame people if their actions or circumstances or identities that don't conform to the community's beliefs. Some religions shun or even excommunicate someone for divorce or being an LGBTQ person. Trauma and abuse. Shame is a common and painful after effect of abuse, sexual assault, and other traumas. The shame that survivors can experience can continue for years, impacting their relationship and mental health. All we need to do is to look at the Jeffrey Epstein files right now and see those thousands of women who were abused by Jeffrey Epstein to know that the shame that they must have felt as teenagers. Or imagine all the individuals who survived the trauma of the campfire or the forest fires around you, and how many of them suffered because they thought showing their feelings or expressing their hurts was weak. And so they had to be strong, so they stuffed their feelings deep downwind. Comparison. Circumstances that remind us of perceived shortcomings that we have can stir up shame. If someone is struggling financially, for example, and they see a friend take a fabulous trip or buy an expensive item, it may bring up shame within them because they're unable to afford that at this time. And last but not least is internal factors. Some people are more prone to shame than others, and shame tends to affect people more intensely in their certain life stages, such as adolescence. And that's why those telephones are so detrimental to our young people. If someone has a mental health disorder, they're also more likely to feel shame, whether due to their altered state of mind or from the stigma associated with mental illness. Even as adults, we have authority figures in our lives. As children, we certainly had several. There were teachers and parents and other relatives or babysitters, just to name a few. Shame may come from any one of those sources. As adults, it might be a boss or a co-worker or a spouse or even a friend. The shame can come from outside sources, internal beliefs, or a combination of both coming together. There is the influence of shame, which is an attempt to make others change their behavior. Shame teaches people to believe they're inherently bad, making it difficult to envision better or healthier choices. Just imagine how that may affect our own spiritual growth. Shame should never, ever be used as a motivator. One study even indicated that people with addictions were more likely to relapse when shame for their addictive behavior was used as a way to try to get them to quit. Shame is also used to control others. Someone can be shamed into conforming to social norms or fears they've excluded. Think about young people who are joining gangs just to survive, and yet shame is used in the gang process. This can happen in workplaces, faith communities, neighborhoods, schools, families, and friend groups. Shame is an emotion that enables stigma, and that establishes certain parts of people's lives or identities as disgraceful or socially unacceptable. Its purpose is to set rules for what's allowed and what is not allowed. In society today, mental illness, suicide, and homelessness all carry a certain amount of stigma. And daring greatly, Brene Brown describes 4 steps to develop shame resilience or resistance. First, we have to learn to recognize our feelings of shame. Next, we have to identify what triggers those feelings. It is important to next think about the elements that cause us to feel shame. Exactly how do these elements exist in our life? Why do they exist? And who do they harm or benefit? What is the broader impact in our life? We have to be willing to reach out and develop compassionate relationships. This is why vulnerability is so important. We need relationships with people who are empathetic and willing to listen to us. Finally, share your stories and ask others to share theirs. Through shared stories, we have a greater understanding of ourselves and others, and shame derives its power when we don't speak about it. We are caught between a rock and a hard place. We hear being vulnerable, and so the darkness, the challenges, the fears stay hidden within each of us. We spend so much time and energy trying to avoid our challenges and hard topics, and yet when we face them, we become free. Brene calls the following her twinkle light quote: "Only when we're brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. Only when we're willing to peel away more layers of the onion will we find the heart of an issue so that we can heal. And that may take time to find all the layers of the onion." When working with my spiritual mentor, I'm always surprised when an issue rises up again and I complain, "I dealt with this 2 years ago. Why is it showing up again?" I thought I was done, and Catherine always reminds me that my consciousness has shifted and that what was hidden in the darkness has now come forward to the light to be healed. Dr. Brown's research suggests that building relationships based on vulnerability and empathy can help us overcome the negative impact of shame. Having a strong support system allows us to help others cope with their own feelings of shame. Social acceptance and connection is reinforced by our brain chemistry, and the pain that results from social rejection and disconnection is a very real pain. It is so important in our spiritual communities to reach out to those others, especially newcomers and those we don't know. Connection with others is one of the things that helps us prevent suicide. We've all experienced times in our life when we're at that place of fight, flight, or freeze. Brown cites the work of Linda Hartling and Karen Horney to outline the strategies of disconnection we use to deal with shame. Some of us move away by withdrawing or hiding or silencing ourselves and keeping secrets. Others move towards seeking to appease and please others. And still others move against trying to gain power over others through aggression or fighting shame with shame. Certainly all of those steps are part of fight, flight, or freeze. Ernest Holmes didn't write anything about shame. He did, however, write a great deal on the topic of fear. And in one of my favorite books by him, This Thing Called You, he stated the following: "Whatever you identify yourself with you will become like. Whatever you resist until you make it a reality, you will also become like. Don't fight your fears, see through them. There is nothing in God's world to be afraid of." It is time for all of us to dig deep and take a look at our fear of shame and vulnerability. We certainly don't want to identify with our fears or shame, and we will surely find our life more open, love-filled, and creative when we heal the darkness of shame within. Renee often quotes a speech presented by Theodore Roosevelt at the Sorbonne in Paris on April 23rd, 1910. She even posted it in her office and read it every day when she was writing Daring Greatly. Note her book title, comes from this speech. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly? May we all dare greatly in our lifetime and release the shame that holds us to the past. This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours, and so it is. Amen.